Now, this evening we have one of my favorite guests that I've ever had on the show, and I'm very excited to bring him back. And I'm going to give you a quote from him first, and then we're going to tell you a little bit about his organization, and then we're going to go ahead and bring him on. Sinisterism is about finding the primal aspects of the left-hand path. Primal in history, primal in the psyche, thus obtaining truth. That was from the man himself, Thomas Leroy of the sect of the Horn God. And I will tell you a little bit about them, because their mission is to bridge the gap between the spiritual and the rational, to plant the seed of doubt in many, to fuel the black flame in some, and bring about the higher self in man and woman, and those willing to work at it and for it. Now join me. Grab your athames, put on your ceremonial attire, light your candles, and focus on your desires. Step into the circle, give out the secret names, give offering and praise as we stare into the flames, and summon the spirit that is Thomas Leroy. Thomas, my friend, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back on.
Absolutely. Like I said, we had such a great episode last time, and I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, but I think it was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, pretty close to.
Pretty crazy to think how time has flown, and what a 2 years it has been. If you could pick any 2 year period in history, it's kind of a strange set of 2 years that we had over the last two.
Yeah, I saw a meme recently that said, I'm a history buff, but I didn't want to relive the 20th century in two years.
Yeah, it's been, I'll tell you what, trying and testing to everyone, and I'm glad that hopefully we're seeing a little bit of a silver lining. Hopefully, we're not, because there's a lot of shit going on around the world right now, but I'm just saying that, COVID seems to be dissipating for the most part, and unfortunately now we're dealing with a lot of an economic crisis. I can't talk tonight for some reason, and dealing with a lot of different things in that nature, but at least we can leave our houses again, so that's nice.
Yeah, that's a plus.
So how's things been for you?
Excellent. I'm outstanding.
So Thomas, obviously the last 2 years have been a little trying for a lot of different reasons, but I would like to know from your perspective as someone who runs the sect, how has that been? I mean, what effect have you seen? Less participation? Have you seen more participation of people reaching out and wanting to be a part of this great organization? I mean, how has that been from your perspective in that regard?
Luckily, it hasn't affected it much. If anything, there's been an uptick of membership, I think. I mean, let's face it, people were sitting at home with not a whole lot to do except go on Amazon and, I don't know, order shit they don't really need while they're halfway drunk. So, for instance, I have the YouTube channel, Thomas Leroy, where I basically, well, you've seen it. I mean, you're very familiar with it. Where I go into depth into the left-hand path and different aspects of the left-hand path, from psychological to mythological to philosophical, and of course the esoteric. And over the last couple of years, people have been spending a lot of time on YouTube. So I guess you can say in some ways it has helped. And also it got us into having Zoom gatherings within the sect. I like to use the term gathering instead of meeting, because meetings are boring. So in some ways, strangely, it's kind of helped.
I think it would. I mean, because like you said, there's so many people that were sitting at home and saying, what do I do with my time now? And a lot of people that help them discover new things in life. Maybe they've never really looked into the occult and were curious and now have discovered it. Maybe it's something they were always curious about and never had time to indulge. Maybe they've always been into it and just didn't know which way to turn, and they start to find new areas of travel. They start to look into things and say, well, I never heard of this guy. Who's Thomas Leroy? Who's the sect of the Horn God? And all it takes for someone to really be blown away by you, brother, I think, is for them to find your YouTube channel and start to just click away and listen, because you have, for anybody listening out there, if you haven't checked it out, please do, because there's just countless videos, countless fruits of knowledge that you can click on and hear about a vast array of topics and discussions that Thomas presents to you that are gems. They give you knowledge, and that's one of the things we'll talk about tonight, and kind of what is embedded into sinisterism, which we'll jump into. Even if you don't know what that term means, you're witnessing it when you're watching his videos.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. Yes. Well, do you want to get into sinisterism right now? Or?
I say jump right into it, brother. Why don't you explain to us kind of how you came about, forming your brand of Satanism, sinisterism, and your brand of the left-hand path, and why it is different than what you're seeing a lot of organizations just spewing out these days.
Well, initially, I was growing frustrated with basic Satanism. The reason being is, well, if you Google Satanism, you don't get the Church of Satanism as at the top of the Google list. You get the Satanic Temple, which is not, in my view, a left-hand path organization or a political organization who uses Satan or Satanism as a way to, let's say, perturb the neighbors. You know what I mean? Rile up the Christian and so on. And also, the Church of Satan, unfortunately, it just isn't the same since LaVey died.
Absolutely not.
So you have those two forms of Satanism. Then you have the online, angry, childish form of Satanism, where people are simply being rebellious. They're upset at mommy and daddy for making them sit in the pews and listen to sermons on Sunday. And I understand that. I get that, because I think we were all there at one time. We felt we were lied to. We found Christianity to be hypocritical and so on, and it pissed us off. But that's where you begin. That's not where you should stay. And too many people, people my age, if not older, I see that they're still there at the starting line. So I decided to, also myself innately, I have a very, how should I say, extreme nature. When I get into something, I really get into it. I like to dig deep. I like to find out whatever I can. I'm an extremist in that respect. So I started investigating different aspects of the left-hand path than simply Satanism. Satanism isn't the left-hand path. It is a vehicle on the path, the most popular vehicle in the Western world. So I decided, okay, I'm going to look beyond that, into dark paganism, into forms of Odinism, if you will. Hinduism has become a big part of my personal practice. And after a while, I decided, okay, a Satanist, okay, is who I am innately, as codified by LaVey. I am by just my character, my nature is satanic. But I wanted more. I wanted a word that expressed more. So I came up with the term sinisterism or sinistrous. Now, these words already exist. And for instance, if you Google it, you might get a book called Sinisterism, which is written by a right-wing political type who uses it in reference to the left, political left, that is. Now, of course, the left-hand path and leftist politics, they are not the same thing. They just share that word, the left. Anyway, I decided to use the word sinisterism because sinister, the word sinister comes from the Latin word sinistra, meaning left. So it's an eclectic form of the left-hand path. And also there's so many people out there that like to incorporate more than simply Satanism or Luciferianism or whatever into their path. So if you are someone who is very eclectic in their tastes, in their practice, you would be a general, let's say, sinistrous, and generally speaking. Now there's another form of sinistrism, if you will, where it goes a little more in depth. And as in that quote that you read, it is getting into primal aspects of not only yourself, not only your psyche, but also going down into history to try to uncover some root purity, if you will. Try to find that initial spark that set this all off. I mean, going way back, let's say back earlier than the Proto-Indo-Europeans, into what was sometimes referred to as the eternal natural law, that philosophy, if you will, that spread from Ireland all the way to India and everywhere in between, that over time became known as, let's say, paganism or even the occult, which somewhat still survives in, let's say, Hinduism. Hinduism has that's one practice that still has very strong aspects of that original core philosophy, and that is what I am, in a sense, searching for, trying to find that truth. Who was that first individual? And of course, we're never going to know who that individual is, but I'm attempting to try to uncover who was that first individual, who's that first god, that was etched on that cave wall, possibly a horned god. And that first individual that looked at a horned god on that wall and said, I'm not going to bow down to that etching. I want to be, or I am that etching. I am that god. And hence the beginning of the path. So in a sense, sinistrism is the oldest and newest form of the left-hand path.
And I love that, man. I mean, it's very powerful because there's a couple things you said within that resonate. Because, as you said, the problem with Satanism is, as we all started out, most of us were misunderstood or angry or had a gripe with the world, or we had something to prove, and that's how we usually have found ourselves following the path of Satanism, and that's okay. It's a great start. But the problem is, as you said, people don't leave it from there. They stay in that mindset, not only when they begin 20, 30, 40 years later, are still in that mindset. They've never breached beyond just the anger, and that's wrong. You're shorting yourself so much by not looking further into yourself, into what's out there, studying. And I know, as you said, Hinduism was a big thing for you, and it was for me, and that's what I think originally caught my eye about you years back. Is whenever I came across you, I didn't know too many people that were really into aspects of Hinduism, but were into aspects of Satanism, which were into aspects of multiple other facets of information and theologies, and that was always me. And when I came across your page and I started watching some of your videos, and you were talking about, Vamakara and Dakshinakara, and then the right and left hand, or the left and right hand paths of Hinduism, and how that really, Satanism stemmed from that, or the left hand path and right hand path in a Western sense stemmed from that. And I'm like, wow, I don't hear too many people talking about this. And then you dug further and further into some of your videos, and I'm like, holy shit, this dude thinks just like me. I'm like, that's crazy, or I think like him, And I'm like, that doesn't happen often. And I'm like, I love this. I love the fact that it's okay to be a Satanist, but I've also denounced myself from that specific term, though I am a Satanist in essence.
Sure.
I kind of breach away from that because of the idea that holds for most people, because you do see most people being the angry, misunderstood, and that's all I am, or there is nothing out there, more of a nihilistic, atheistic perspective of Satan, or you have others that are just, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being theistic, I am myself, but, you know, you have people that go the extreme that way, but there's that balance. There's that balance in between, and you have really honed that in with Sinisterism, and I love that. And that was why a lot of people say, well, aren't you a Satanist? I'm like, yeah, I don't really go by that anymore. I'm like, because I feel like that gives me too much of a certain... too much of a certain clothing that I wear that people spot me by. I can't correlate or associate with that these days because you have too much of that I come across Satanists that I start to ask them about theology or about beliefs and very well thought out and intellectual topics and conversations, and they can't hold those conversations. And I'm like, so you really don't actually know much about Satanism, do you? And oftentimes they don't. It's almost like a lot of Christians. A lot of Christians will preach to you the Word of God all day long, but then when you actually start asking them in-depth questions about the Bible or where the Bible stems from and in-depth ideas and theologies of it, they can't really answer you. And you're like, you've never really read your book, have you?
But, okay, staying on that topic, though, of atheism, endless atheism, and so on and so forth, I cannot stand that debate.
Oh, and God, it's endless. It's endless. Yeah.
It is really big in the satanic community. You see people going back and forth, and it's like, whoa, both sides, just stop. You know, you are missing the point. And the point is what you get out of this practice. This practice should be making you a better person, not an angry little prick. You know what I mean? Like, so many people are Satan means adversary, so I'm adversarial. It's like, oh, shut up. You're a child. You are a frustrated human being that probably got picked on in high school, and now you're online and you feel you got a little bit of power because you've discovered this philosophy, if you will. So now you're going to take out your frustrations on others. You know what? You know, maybe you had gone through all that bullshit. You know what I mean? We've all had tough lives to one degree or another. You got to utilize your path to make you a better person. It should be leading you to a higher self, not to a more prickish self. And getting back, okay, the basic atheist argument. My view is this: there are currents, and we talked about this before.
Yes.
There are currents with different masks, if you will, different, and these currents, they could be called, these can be the archetypes coming from some place called the collective unconscious. And they are something greater than you, in a sense, but at the same time, part of you.
Yes.
And they have, in different cultures, with different individuals even, they wear different masks. Okay, and one of those masks for this specific, let's say, current, this left-hand path current, it could be Satan. To my view, a stronger one would be Shiva. Also, Odin would be another one too, a most misunderstood god. And what you do is you learn from these entities. As I like to say, the gods can be the wind at your back, or they can be pulling your leash. And I see some now, besides the angry atheists, the theist type, who say, Satan is my Lord, I worship Satan, I bow down to him, he is my God. I just feel like going, stop. If you do that, you're leaning more to the right-hand path.
Yes.
You can acknowledge that there are forces greater than you, but your goal on this path is for you to be as those gods are, if you will. And you're not going to you don't want to sit in the laps of these gods. You want to push one of them off their throne, if you will, and you want to sit your ass on it.
And that's correct. And I mean, like you said, there's that debate all the time, and it is about what you gain from it. And that's the problem, is the base level is I use this as a front to cover up my sorrow. The thing is, the adult Satanist or the adult left-hand path practitioner realizes that through the works of darkness and through the discovery of your inner darkness, you become a much better person. On an everyday aspect, I am a very nice man. I help anyone that I can. I hold a professional career. It's by all means, and I don't feel like anybody who's in the left-hand path isn't normal, but what I'm saying is most people's perspective is like, oh, wow, you're a very normal and nice guy. And I say, absolutely, why wouldn't I be? Because I am a left-hand path practitioner, because I'm a diabolist. I don't understand. These things that you think would make me odd or weird or evil are actually the things that made me kind and grow and found my inner strength and inner godhood. And that's what I have grown from. I don't feel anger. I don't feel this incredible darkness that I need to spew out on the world. I've actually found freedom and divinity through the works of working with ancient gods and working with demons. And some people can't understand that. And I stand as equal in reverence and respect, yes, but I do not grovel at anything's feet or anyone's feet, and never will. And I think a lot of times that confuses people, because I will say I'm a devil worshiper. So if you worship, then you bow at their feet, but I never meant it in that regard. Sure. I work heavily in ritual with demon spirits and spirits of all different kinds, elementals, and even necromantic operations. And in these operations, I show respect. But once again, when something does arrive in my temple, I don't bow down in front of it and say, I am worthless before you, oh great one. I stand toe to toe and show love and respect. And as you said, where I believe is that it is both internal and external. As you said, they are the deific masks of the ancient currents, and they come in different forms. So imagine, folks, a river going downstream, and off of that river is multiple, bodies of water, creeks and streams that go off of that. Those creeks and streams are the different deific masks of the ancients that you can call upon, and they are very real, and they will change your life. They can be tapped into and worked with. They are themselves have unique aspects and personalities, but they are archetypes of the main river, the main current, that ancient force that courses through each and every one of us, that courses through each and everything that you see in this world. And that's what people don't understand. So yes, they are external because they can be interacted with, but they are also internal because what lies inside is also what lies in everything. Why do you think there's the ancient axiom of as above, so below, as within, so without? This has been said time and time again, and is a very important thing in occult literature and occult practices, because that is exactly it. Is outside of you, you can experience wondrous and wild things, but through meditation, you can experience wild and wonderful things, and they are one and the same, though projected through different lenses. So the debate of atheistic and theistic and nihilistic and all these other fucking terms that people want to use is really obsolete and hearsay. It doesn't matter. It's about how you grow from your experiences in your practice.
Exactly. And your point about a flow, a river, if you will, with its tributaries. One thing you do not want to do is dam those rivers.
Yes. Correct.
Right. A good example of this is the Wotan or Odin current. That was dammed back roughly, let's say 900 years ago, when Christianity basically took over within the Scandinavian world. And Wotan is, you don't want to repress Wotan, if you will. And they did. And finally, starting roughly 120 years ago, maybe, the Germanic people were starting to rediscover Wotan, and there was a hole forming in that dam, and then finally that dam broke, and what happened? You ended up with World War II. I'm talking what happened with the Nazis and Hitlerian philosophy and so on and so forth. I'm not saying people who worship Wotan are Nazis or anything like that. I'm just showing the repression of an archetype can lead, if it breaks through, can lead to sheer chaos.
Absolutely. And the problem is, too, I mean, not only do you don't want to dam it up, but then in the same respect, you have people who dabble in magic. Now, there's two different sides, folks, of magic, and that needs to be clear-cut, something I want to, express very quickly. Both very powerful, both very transformative in your life. And there's magic and there's mysticism. Both are very different, but they are correlated with one another. People think that they're one and the same. They are not. Through mysticism and through alchemy, you can change your life without ever stepping inside the circle or lighting candles and doing ritual. Through meditative practices, through different forms of yoga, especially as Thomas and I have talked about, in the Hindu perspective, there's tons of different mantras and mudras and yantras that you can do to absolutely change your life without ever doing ritual. But on the opposite side of that, there is a lot of ritual that you can do to change your life without ever having to know the theologies and necessarily do some of that working, but they are kind of one in the same there. Now, where it gets tricky is you have people that will start working with a spirit, with a deific mask, and start working with a current and disrespect that current or block that current up once working with it. You know what? I decided, I opened it up and then I shut the door quickly on it because I don't want to work with it. What you don't realize is, once again, this is external and internal. When you work with a spirit and it shows itself externally, it is outside of you, but once again, it's also within you. So once you breach and open that bridge of communication, what happens is this external force, this external current, opens an internal doorway within your psyche. And it can open and help you grow, or it can flood you and drown you out. You have to find harmony and balance, equilibrium when working with these forces. But as Thomas said, you don't just shut the door or dam it up, because when you block it off, it backs up that flow somewhere else within you and without you. So you have to work with these spirits and open a clean flow. And that's why I said that both perspectives are technically true, but also both perspectives are false when you look at an atheistic or theistic perspective, because there is things outside of you, but they're also acting at the same time internally within you. It's a paradox. Most great things in occultism are paradoxes. To most average eye and ear, they don't make sense, and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's why it's occult. That's why it's hidden and obscure. Because it takes you working these things to shed layers, to start growing and transcend, and that is something I've always believed in, and that's why I fell in love with Thomas's work, because that is sinisterism. That is reaching beyond the normal mundane understanding and perspectives of the left-hand path and growing beyond that and transforming into something beyond that. So kudos to you, brother, for what you do. I'm glad to see someone else doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, basically what you're saying is you have to delve into the irrational to get some better rational understanding of all this.
Yes.
It is 100% a paradox.
It is. And a great book on that was, what the hell was it? Eliphas Levi's one book. It was specifically on paradoxes. Phenomenal read out there, folks. Eliphas Levi is one of my favorite occultists of all time, as I'm sure any of you guys listening out there have heard me talk about or make posts about over time. But he has a book that talks about nothing but the paradoxes of occultism in a way that is so enlightening. And as you listen to it, it just really does something to your brain and changes you. And I suggest everyone going out there and finding it. I'm actually looking it up right now so I can give you guys an idea of the name. Paradoxes of the Highest Science. If you haven't read it, definitely should. It'll definitely do some crazy stuff to your mind. Levi's
drawing of Baphomet. I mean, that right there that's the ultimate paradox, isn't it?
He was an interesting character because, yes, I mean, and a lot of times people, that's another blind. Folks, the occult is filled with blinds. And I'll be honest with you, I gave many blinds over the last 2 seasons. There was a lot of things that I said that I didn't necessarily, and that's another reason I apologize, believe in. I was doing it to test certain guests, and I was doing it to not want to release too much information. My whole experience of the last 20 years being a practitioner was keep the secret doctrine secret. And I still believe into that to a certain extent. But I feel these days that it's okay to release some of the secrets because, a famous saying, from Hermes Trismegistus is the ears of understanding, or the mouth of understanding is closed, or the mouth of wisdom is closed except to the ears of understanding. You can give that information away. Someone who's not ready for it isn't going to understand it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I was always kind of on the opposite perspective of that, of cast pearls not before swine lest they turn and rend you, because you don't want to give these secrets away. But what I found myself doing is blinds and putting up blinds, and I would say things like, when summoning, if you're doing hardcore ritual work, don't use angelic names, don't use ancient secret names and all this, or you don't need to use circles and I don't use circles and this and that. I was doing that to cater a certain perspective to see what kind of responses I've got, because that is the new age thought of things. But let me tell you a secret, folks, real quick. Using angelic names isn't disrespectful to daemon spirits. Using a circle doesn't make you a pussy and mean that you're tough if you don't use one. In fact, not using a ceremonial ritual circle when doing hardcore demonic invocations or invocations is dumb. And you might think, I got away with it tonight, tomorrow night, next week. But what you don't realize is it doesn't have an effect on you that night or next week. It has an effect on you 5 years from now when you're least thinking of it. These things are like electricity. They're like currents. If you work with them improperly, you might get away with it a few times, but you might just happen to grab the wrong piece of metal and just bop, done. And people don't realize that. There's formulas to this. There's ancient alchemical formulas of why god names were used, why certain rods and wands were used with specific writing etched into them. And for those that are not initiated, they don't understand this. And there are purposes for this. So I apologize for putting out some of those blinds before, but Eliphas Levi, it was a blind in himself because he comes from a very Christian perspective, or so most people believe, and he condemns sorcerers in some of his work, but then he gives you the exact formula to perform amazing feats of sorcery. He talks about not being for the profane and the devil, but yet he created the most famous glyph of the Baphomet. And, there's ritual circles and invocations he's given in his books that are very extremely powerful. So what I'm saying, folks, is read behind the lines of everything. Stop going off of what the book itself says at face value. Stop going about what your friend says or other practitioners. You must experience things for yourself, and that's what we've been saying here tonight is, what does your practice do for you? Are you just following blindly, or are you growing within your working and practice, unfolding those layers and having your own personal gnosis? And that's important, because there's a lot of blinds out there to mislead you on purpose. They don't want you finding the garden.
Fascinating perspective on that. Not only Eliphas Levi, but Crowley himself was supposedly, as he says, was no fan of black magic or the left-hand path. But who, more than anyone else, besides maybe LaVey, is synonymous with black magic and the left-hand path to a certain degree? Yeah, think about it. So yeah, you're the term putting in blinds or whatever. Yeah, he would be another really good example.
Yeah, putting up blinds, and once again, it's one of those paradoxes. I mean, people sit there and say, well, Crowley was never about black magic. But then it's like he was once called the evilest man to ever live, and it's like, so how does that work?